Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got our first video of our new season preview series. We did this last year, we're going to do this again this year. I'm going to give you my preview for the start of the season for each and every 32 teams. Today, talking about the Seattle Kraken and the Vancouver Canucks. We'll go to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey Channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're able to without you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and hopefully leave a comment down in the comment section below so we can all discuss in this video. Now, we got our season preview video here. Again, we had our off-season preview video a couple of months ago now, talking about teams and looking ahead to their off-seasons. Now we're going to be looking ahead to the start of the season. So basically, what we're going to do in these videos, we're going to start off by recapping the 23-24 season for each of these teams, including some of their top point getters and goal scorers for each of these teams. We're going to look at the additions and losses that each team's made in the offseason, including their top 3 picks in their most recent draft. We're going to look at the 2 biggest questions facing these teams right now. I'm going to be looking at my projections for these teams for the upcoming season, as well as my projected lineup. And I'm also going to give you 3 reasons I can see these teams improve to get better for next year. Plus, I'm also going to give you my rating for their offseason. So we're going to start today's video off by looking at the Seattle Kraken and the Vancouver Canucks. I'm also going to be looking at these videos in pairs of teams. I'm going to be going through teams who are most likely done with all their moves for this year first. Like, say, we're going to look at Seattle and Vancouver today. I don't expect them to make too many more moves. But teams like Columbus who could move Line or Edmonton who could move CC, I'm going to do later on. So just a little bit of a breakdown as to what we're going to do here today. We're going to start today's video off by looking at the Seattle Kraken. Now, the Kraken this past year didn't have an overly great season. I finished with a record of 34, 35, and 13 for 81 points. That was 6th best in the Pacific. That was 12th best in the West. And that was 25th best in the NHL. So not an overly great season there for the Kraken. They had 217 goals this year, which was a major drop off from last year, where I think they had nearly 300. They were 29th in the NHL in goals for. Meanwhile, their goals against was not too bad. They had 236 goals against, which are not being top 10 in the NHL this year, 9th in the NHL. So interesting stuff there. Point scorers, their top 3 point scorers from this past year were McCann, who had 62 points, Oliver Bjorkstrand, who had 59 points, and Vince Dunn, who had 46 points. So not too many really high goal scorers. Usually you see 1 or 2 players on a lot of teams who hit 70 plus points. They only had 1 player hit 60 plus. So not overly great point players there for the Kraken. Goal scorers, they had Jared McCann lead the team with 29 goals, followed by Bjorkstrand, who had 20, and Eberle, who had 17. So once again, not overly great. Only 2 players had plus 20 on the goal scoring department. So interesting stuff there for Seattle. The rookie scorer who had the most points was Ty Kartye. Kartye wound up finishing the season with 11 goals, 9 assists, and 20 points this year. So he was the team's best rookie this past year. So interesting stuff there for Seattle. If you look at the team's additions and losses, if you look at their additions, they brought back John Hayden, Max McCormick, Luke Henman, and Eli Tolvanen, who are all either RFAs or penny UFAs who they brought back. So interesting stuff there. They also bring in Chandler Stephenson on a 7-year deal. So they've used $6.25 million. Bring in some depth from the forward group as well by adding guys like Brendan Biro, Ben Mayers, and Mitchell Stevens. On the defensive end, they added Montour on a 7-year deal with AAV of $7.14 million. And then they also add Josh Mashura and Max Lajoie with some depth on the defensive end. So some interesting additions there. They lose Thomas Tatar to New Jersey. They lose Pierre Ward-Belmar and Kyle Yamamoto, who are both UFAs right now. They lose Cole Lynn to Dallas. They lose Devin Shore to Minnesota. They lose Justin Schultz, who's also a UFA right now. And they lose Chris Drieger to Florida. They did make 1 trade this year that didn't involve just pick-for-pick swaps, and that was them trading Brian Dumoulin to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for their 2026 4th-rounder. So that was an interesting move there from the Seattle Kraken. So some pretty interesting additions there to offset some of their losses. The top 3 picks for this year for the Seattle Kraken from this past year's draft. The 1st-round pick, 8th overall, was Berkeley Catan. That was a pretty good pickup there for them. He should eventually be solid middle 6 forward. They also get Julius Mietin, who I think eventually could be a really good pickup there for them. He got him in the 2nd round, 40th overall. And then they also got Nathan Villanueva, who was 63rd overall, and should also be a really good pickup there long term. So at 1st and 2 2nd-round picks were top 3 picks in the draft, getting Villanueva, Mietin, and Catan. So pretty good pickups there for the Kraken. The 2 biggest questions entering the training camp for the Kraken, in my opinion, opinion are: one, the Beniers extension. They have around $6.5 million in cap space. At this current point in time, Beniers has not been extended. My guess would be at this point they'd probably give him some sort of a bridge deal, like a 2 to 3 year deal, around like $5.5–6 million. So that will probably be my guess as to what the contract will look like. But at this point, they still don't have a contract in place, so that's a little bit worrisome in my opinion, to see if the Kraken do wind up making some sort of a move to try and free up some cap space. But it's interesting to note there the Beniers is still unsigned, so that's a big question in my opinion. Second, will Wright make the team? Wright's a really good player there in the Seattle Kraken organization. He started to work his way up over the past couple of years. I think he's poised to make a top 9 role this year at the NHL level, so we're gonna have to wait and see. But I think the big questions for the Kraken, in my opinion, right now are the Beniers contract and will Wright make the team. Those are two major questions in my opinion. Going over to my lineup projections and my predictions for the Seattle Kraken for this upcoming season. My projections for their lineup is this: I have a top line of Beniers once he's signed, centering Eberle and McCann. I have Stephenson being the second line centers, centering Furcus and Bjorkstrand. I have Wright centering line 3 with Burakovsky and Eeli Tolvanen, and I have Yanni Gourde centering line 4 with Jane Schwartz and Brandon Tanev. That's a pretty good forward group in my opinion. Defensively, I have Dunn playing with Larson again. I have Alexiak playing with Montour, and I have Riker Evans playing with Will Borgen, so that's a pretty good defensive core. I have Ducour being the 1A, I have Grubauer being the 1B, and the two spares I have Ty Karche and Josh Mahura, and that would be a cap compliant roster. So interesting stuff there, but that's sort of the lineup projections I'm looking at there for Seattle Kraken for this upcoming season. And meanwhile, for the placement I have them currently in the projections, I have them finishing 17 points higher than last year with 98 points. I have them being the first wildcard team, just sneaking into the playoffs. So I don't think they'll do overly bad. They might still miss the playoffs. I've seen a lot of people say that, but I could see them be sort of like the Nashville next year, where a lot of people are expecting them to miss the playoffs. Even after making some decent additions in the offseason, they surprise a lot of people and make a wildcard spot. So I could see Seattle be that sort of a team. I have them finishing 4th in the Pacific, and with 98 points, making the playoffs as a first wildcard team. So that's my opinion on the Kraken currently. If you look at the 3 ways that, in my opinion, I can see them improve to be a much more competitive team next year. One, they need more offense. They add Montour and Stephenson to give them some more offensive boosts. I think adding Wright in the offensive group will also give them an offensive boost, and if they can have some players have bounce back seasons after having lower end seasons last year, like say Eberle, Schwartz, Burakovsky, maybe a couple of other guys too, I think this team could definitely take some more steps offensively, which would be a huge way to improve themselves back into the playoffs spot. If they can get some better play from Grubauer, that could also be a huge indication they could turn things around and go back into a playoff spot. Grubauer is a fantastic goaltender, but he hasn't really worked out overly well in Seattle. So if he can pull his way in the core, replicates what he did last year, I think the Kraken are going to be really good net. And if they can have younger players step into those big roles, I mean, like I said, Wright is a guy who I think could definitely be a solid second, third line center this past year, but I also have Furcus making the team. He's a rookie, he's never played the NHL level. I could see him be a really good pickup there in the middle six. You also have Riker Evans, who I have making the third pair on the defensive end. He could be a really good pickup there. So I have younger players stepping into bigger roles there for the Kraken this year. And I think if they can have those players thrive in those bigger roles, such as Fergus, Wright, and Evans, I think this team could be really, really good. So that's my opinion of the Seattle Kraken. Those are the 3 ways I can see them improve. Those are 2 biggest questions I have for them. That's my projections of their lineup and predictions of where they're going to finish in the standings, their offseason additions and losses, their season from last year. So in my opinion, with all the things that they've done this offseason, they're going to give them a B+ rating. They had a pretty good offseason, in my opinion. Replaced a lot of their lost depth with some added depth. They added Stephenson and Montour, who I think, as much as their contracts are not going to age overly well, are going to be fantastic additions this year. Like, I expect Stephenson to be a 50 to 60 point player this year, and Montour to be a 40 to 50 point player, and I expect Montour to sort of run that top power play unit for that Kraken team. So I expect the Kraken to definitely get some more offense, get some more help, and I think their B+ rating for this offseason is warranted. Plus, I also think that this team is going to be playoff bound this year. So that's my opinion on the Seattle Kraken. Going over to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks. Now, they are in an interesting situation. Now, this past year, they had one of their better seasons in recent memory. They wound up finishing 50, 23-9 for 109 points this past year. Finished 1st in the Pacific Division, 3rd in the Western Conference, and 6th in the entire league. So they were nearly a top 5 team this year in the NHL, which is pretty good. They wound up having 279 goals for, which was good for 8th in the NHL, and 223 goals against, which was good for 5th in the NHL. So they were top 10 in both the goals for WAR and goals against departments. They were a fantastic team, both offensively and defensively this year. Their top points getters, one was JT Miller, who put up 103 points. Second was Quinn Hughes on that team, who put up 92 points. And third was Elias Pettersson on that team, who had 89 points. So definitely lots of players who had over a point per game on the Canucks, and Miller, Hughes, and Pettersson led the way. If you look at the goal scoring, Brock Boeser hit 40 goals. That was a career high for him, and that was the team leader for the Canucks this year. JT Miller had 37 goals, and Elias Pettersson had 34 goals. So we go for a team in Seattle who didn't have a 30-goal scorer to the Canucks, who had a couple of 30-goal scorers, including a 40-goal scorer in Boeser. So they had a lot of really good goal scorers this past year. If you look at the top rookie point getter this past year for the Vancouver Canucks, that wound up being Arshdeep Bains. Now, all the rookies didn't have any points, but he did play the most amount of games with 8 games played this past year. So Canucks didn't have a whole bunch of rookies play this year, and Bains was the guy who did wind up having the most points. Interesting stuff there. If you look at the top playoff performers there for the Canucks, Miller and Boeser led the way in points in the playoffs with 12, while Boeser had 7 goals and Lindholm had 5 goals in the playoffs. So some really good stuff there from Boeser, Lindholm, and Miller in the playoffs. Boeser was definitely one of their better players. So definitely some interesting stuff there from this past year. They wound up making the playoffs. Unlike Seattle, where they missed, they made the playoffs. Wound up being Nashville in 6 games before losing to Edmonton in 7. So definitely they gave the Western Conference champions a run for their money, but definitely it was not able to get them to the next round. So interesting stuff there, but they did make the second round, which was a pretty good feat for a Canucks team that was just trying to make it back to the playoffs. This past year, the additions they made, they brought back Teddy Bluger, Dakota Joshua, Tyler Myers, Mark Friedman, as well as RFAs Carlson, Ronick, McCord, Wu, and Seeloff. So they made a lot of players back, including some big UFAs, so a lot of people were wondering if they would be back in Myers, Joshua, and Bluger. So interesting stuff there. They also add Jake DeBrusk, they had Danton Heinen, they had Daniel Sprong, they had Nathan Smith and Kiefer Sherwood on the forward group, they had Vinny Desharnais and Derek Forbert on the defensive end, and they had Yeri Patera on the goaltending side. So a lot of really good additions there. Meanwhile, their losses, they lose Elias Lindholm to Boston, Sam Lafferty to Buffalo, Sheldon Dries to Detroit, Aiden McDonough, who was a prospect of theirs, to an AHL affiliate of the Florida Panthers. They lose Nikita Zadorov to Boston, Ian Cole to Utah, and they lose Casey DeSmith to Dallas. So definitely, all in all, not too bad of additions and losses. It definitely improved their forward group, in my opinion, even though they lost Elias Lindholm. Defensively, get a little bit worse, but some pretty good additions there. And that losing DeSmith is bad, but they are going to have Seahawks for a full season this year, so that's a pretty good pickup there for the Canucks. They did make one trade that wasn't a pick-for-pick swap this past year in the offseason, and that was trading Mikheyev, the signing rights with Sam Lafferty, and a 2027 second-round pick to the Chicago Blackhawks for a 2027 fourth-round pick. That was a cost-cutting move, something they needed to do to get rid of the Ilya Mikheyev contract, and they were able to do so, so that's a pretty good pickup there for the Canucks. Their top 3 picks in this past year's draft, one was Fernstrom. He was their first pick in the draft, third-rounder, 93rd overall, so the Canucks didn't have any picks in the first 2 rounds of this year's draft, so interesting to see if Fernstrom was their first pick. They also then had Patterson, who was a 4th-rounder, 125th overall in this year's draft. That was another pretty good pickup there for the Vancouver Canucks. Then they also had Anthony Romani. Romani was a 5th-round pick, 162 overall, so interesting stuff there. Didn't have too many high-level picks. They did pick some pretty good players who I think eventually might see NHL action eventually, so interesting pickups there for the Canucks in their draft class this past year. The 2 biggest questions, in my opinion, for this Canucks team for the training camp, in my opinion, one will be, do they add more on the blue line? They made some pretty good additions. They don't have too much cap space, but do they try and make 1 more or 2 more moves to try and add some more pieces on the blue line? And 2 is, will Podkolzin and Höglander make the team? Both those guys are sort of up in the air right now and in question if they'll make the team or not with the additions that the Canucks have made this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see if those 2 are able to maybe make the NHL team this year, or if they are going to have to play the AHL level, potentially be going on waivers. So I'm not exactly sure, but I think the 2 biggest questions right now for the Canucks is, 1, do they add any more on the blue line? And 2, does Podkolzin or Höglander or both wind up making the team, or do 1 or 2 of them wind up missing? So it'll be interesting to see there. But those are my 2 biggest questions for the Canucks. Going over to my projections for the lineup for this upcoming season, my current projections have Elias Pettersson playing on the top line with Jake DeBrusk and Nils Höglander. My projections have Daniel Sprong playing on the second line with Miller and Boeser. I have the Garland, Bluger, Joshua line remaining in the third line, and I have Kiefer Sherwood playing with Pia Suter and Danton Heinen on the fourth line. Defensively, I have Hughes playing with Ronick, I have Seuss playing with Desharnais, and I have Forbert playing with Myers. So some interesting defensive additions there for the Canucks. In net, I have Demko and Silovs. Demko the starter, Silovs the backup. I have Giuseppe, Nils Aman, and Noah Juleson being the three spares. And I have Tucker Poolin starting the season on the long-term injury reserve for the Canucks. And that would be a cap and plan roster, so that'll be a pretty good lineup there, in my opinion, for the Canucks. Meanwhile, for my projections for this team for this upcoming season, I do have them taking a little bit of a step back. As much as I do think they had a pretty good offseason, I do think the losses of Lindholm and Zadorov will hurt them. But they didn't have those two guys for a majority of the season. So, once again, I think they will take a little bit of a step back, but I'm not going to say they're going to take a huge step back. At some points earlier, I was thinking that this team might wind up being a wildcard team and missing the playoffs, but I think after their offseason, I sort of changed my tune a little bit, and I'm having the Canucks finish with 100 points. I think they're going to finish 9 points lower than last year, and they're not going to be as high in the standings as they were last year, but I do think they will make the playoffs and be a top 3 team in the Pacific Division. I have them finishing 3rd in the Pacific and being a top 3 team with 100 points. So interesting stuff there. That's my prediction right now for the Canucks and where I think they will finish this upcoming offseason. And lastly, looking at 3 ways I can see this team improve to get better and improve on last year. One, I think they need to have a healthy Demko. I think Demko being injured really did hurt that team. Even though Seattle's played really good in the playoffs, I do think the injury to Demko hurt that team. So if he can stay healthy this year, that could be a huge boost to that team. On top of that, if Seattle's can play the way he did in the playoffs next year, they could also take some load off of Demko too. So I think the really good play of Seattle's and the health of Demko are going to be major questions in the answering. One, I think they need to have a better Elias Pettersson, and he started out fantastically last year, but tailed off towards the end of the season in the playoffs. So if they can have a much better Pettersson next year, I think this Canucks team could be a whole bunch better this upcoming season, and they need to continue their good play defensively. This past year had some really good defensive play, but did lose a lot of pieces in guys like Zadorov and Cole. But I do think that this team still needs to be a really good defensive team. They're going to try and make the playoffs again this year. So interesting stuff there. That's my predictions on ways I can see this team improve. The biggest questions I have for this team, my predictions, the projected lineup, their additions and losses, the last season recap. So in my opinion, with their additions and losses and sort of gone about business this year, I have them with a B- rating. I think that sort of warrants where they are right now in the standings. In my opinion, I think they could have had a little bit better if maybe they kept Zadorov or something like that, but I think this team definitely, given their circumstances and what they needed to do, kept a lot of really good players, did lose a couple of really good guys, but replaced them with some decent players. So interesting stuff there, but that's some really good additions there, and I think a B- rating is warranted for a team like the Vancouver Canucks. So interesting stuff there, but that's all I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think about the Canucks and the Kraken? Do you like these two teams as off seasons, with the Kraken adding Stephenson and Montour, and with the Canucks adding guys like DeBrusk and Desharnais? I definitely like these two teams as off seasons. Do you agree with me as the 2 biggest questions entering training camp and the 3 ways I can see these 2 teams improve? Do you agree with my projections as to where the lineups are, plus where I think that these 2 teams are going to finish in the standings this year? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on if you agree or disagree with that. Plus, what do you think about the Kraken? Could they make the playoffs this year? And do the Canucks take a little bit of a step back? Definitely have your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. Until this video, if you like, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you all for your support. We're able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't leave a comment down in the comment section below so you can also discuss today's video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link it down in the description below. Don't forget to stay tuned. We're going to have more season preview series videos over the next little while, talking about all 32 teams in the NHL. So don't forget to stay tuned for that. I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.